Life is all about relationships. Lovers, family, body, or money. How satisfied you are can be completely explained by how you relate to things around you. This is Sophie Jaffe, and together with my husband, Dr. D. Jaffe, we are here to explore and teach you how to maximize your relationships and achieve a happier life. Let's get ignited.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Podcast. My name is D. Jaffe.
I'm Sophie Jaffe.
And we've all heard the stats, right? 95% of businesses fail within 5 years. Starting a business is like starting a family. Partnering up with somebody is like marriage. Entrepreneurs don't sleep, and that makes them special. All these really kind of all over the place stories and thoughts about what it is to start a business. It just so happens that Sophie and I are both entrepreneurs, and we're going to dedicate this episode both to our own story, shifting in and out of different businesses over the last 12 years that we've known each other, and the lessons that we've learned from it. We're also going to talk to an expert business coach, somebody who gets people ready to either start a business or coaches them through the process once they've already begun. So whether you are just considering starting a business and you're thinking about it, or you're already in the middle of it and you just want to learn more, or just find somebody to commiserate with about all the pain you're going through, this episode is for you. So, Soph, you were the first entrepreneur in our family. Because when I met you, I was in grad school. And if I was entrepreneurial, it was in taking on more jobs than were allowed, but I didn't set out on my own and start a business. So talk a little bit about what it felt like to start your own business.
So I started philosophy, out of my kitchen. I broke away from working for somebody else at a juice bar in Hollywood and wanted to have more freedom, wanted to ideally be paid a little more. That didn't happen, but I thought it might happen. And now it is happening, but it took a long time. That really wasn't the main reason I did it, though. I didn't want to work for someone else and be told what to do, how to do it, work 50-hour weeks, not getting paid very much. And I really wasn't super fulfilled anymore by that experience. So I wanted to work for myself and set my own rules, and that's what I did. I broke away. I quit the job at the juice bar and started philosophy out of our kitchen. And we had a little one-bedroom apartment, and I started out just creating plant-based raw food cleanses for my clients before cleanses were a thing. Cleanses were nothing 10 years ago. They did not exist. People didn't do juice cleanses. People didn't do food-based cleanses. Cleanse was a new word. Yeah,
I remember when you would get together with your assistant and or neighbors who would help you, and you guys would have like the assembly line. Our refrigerator would be full of
smoothies and salads.
Our neighbor's fridge at some point ended up having to get filled up as you guys got more popular. You were mixing up your superfood powders in little Tupperware containers in our kitchen.
Yep. Yeah, and I sold our superfood blends, what you now know of as our superfood protein blends, the Green Dream, Cacao Magic, and Berry Bliss. And at that time, I just mixed them myself in mason jars or containers and then weighed them and bagged them up and sold them for 5 times the price they are now, and would meet people in back alleys and street corners and halfway in between our two houses to give them their $200 worth of green powder. And and it's still the same exact ingredients. I've just found ways to cheapen the overall price for all of my customers. And it's been a ride. It's been a journey. And it definitely took a leap of faith. I at no point knew or had guarantee in any way that things would be okay and that we would financially work it all out. I just trusted and had to take that leap of faith.
Yeah, and you hit on a few things. One of them is wanting to make more money than you were making, just managing the juice bar in Hollywood. And then the other one was not work for other people, work for yourself. And I think that's a really big guiding principle for a lot of people, the potential of making a lot of money. I think a lot of people dream of selling their business or getting investors and, making $150, $250, $350 million a year, running their business, selling it for millions of dollars. But then the feeling of freedom, having that freedom of I determine what goes on with me. And that goes along with that whole not sleeping piece. I feel like there's this almost kind of like cachet to I'm going to stay up all night and I'm going to invent my thing and people are going to come to me and flock.
Well, I
etc.
think also you don't ever really get to turn off. So that idea of not sleeping kind of is in some ways a reality in terms of your business. When you work for yourself, the work never stops. It's not a 9 to 5. You don't show up at work and that's when you turn on your computer and start. You are always on.
Yeah. And so after graduating grad school, still got jobs. I was still in academia, and at some point I had 5 jobs. I'm assuming you remember this, but I was teaching at Cal State Long Beach. I was teaching at UCLA. I was working at Matrix Institute. I still had my postdoc. I mean, I was all over the place and working like 70, 75-hour weeks, making okay money, but just really stressed out. And you and I would walk around. By that point, we were in a 2-bedroom apartment, and we had Kai already. We would walk around these circles, just kind of talking in the evening. And he said, "What are you doing? Just stop this stuff." And I'd had this idea of starting a treatment center with my the person who would end up becoming my partner. And eventually we ended up taking the leap and doing that. And then we ended up in a household with 2 entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So 2 people who never stop thinking about their own business, because it doesn't end when 5 o'clock hits and the work day is done. You're still thinking about what you got to do tomorrow and what went wrong today and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would highly suggest anyone listening that if you are thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, that you are in a relationship with someone who's not an entrepreneur, someone who has a stable paycheck, someone who has insurance, all the normal perks and benefits of having a normal job.
Yeah.
And that way you can have the freedom to fly and explore while you still feel safe. So do not recommend 2 people under the same roof both being entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I still keep a job for those benefits and for all the kind of security it brings, but it pays barely any money.
And it's 10 hours a week. So that's great. That 10 hours a week can actually afford us insurance, but most people can't get that. So
sure. Well, but I think part of the whole deal for us is finding creative ways to make ends meet. And we've done a lot of different things to make that happen. And we can talk more and more. And again, this is the first episode we're talking about success and entrepreneurship, but I feel like in the last 10 years, we have altered the idea in our heads of what it means even to be an entrepreneur. The idea that you are focused on a single thing constantly and all the time is one version of that. The people who develop apps or develop a software or have a website, somebody who sells a product. We're diversified kind of entrepreneurs. So we do, I feel like, a lot of different things all the time to make ends meet. But it's definitely led to some tense times. Like if we're both going through hard times at home, if philosophy is not doing well, or your Instagram lifestyle brand is not going really, really well, and my business was suffering, it was causing a lot of strife. And I think the proof is actually, this is a great time to talk about this, because it's been about 2-3 months since we've closed my treatment center. So my treatment center, the business that I'd started on my own, and over about 5 years got it to be really successful and then pretty unsuccessful over some period of time. I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat that because of the noise. My business, which ran for about 5 years, the treatment center, the rehab I had, went from starting out to being very successful to moderately successful until eventually it collapsed. And weirdly, though, for our relationship, things have been a lot better since I don't want to say I stopped being an entrepreneur to some extent, because I have these other little projects going on, but the main business that I was running disappeared. It created a lot of space. And I think that was something that was really hard to untangle ourselves from when we were both in the throes of it, because for the last 6 months to a year of alternatives, the treatment I was running, I was fighting tooth and nail to make it survive, even though it was causing nothing but stress, paying me no money, and being a huge time suck for everything that was going on in life.
think that's a good question too, is to ask yourself, like, when is enough? And giving your all to that thing and really jumping in and not allowing fear to be in your way. I think that's beautiful. But I think there's also something really beautiful about saying enough is enough. And no, I'm not going to sell this business for millions of dollars, but it's destroying my life. And you weren't sleeping. You were stressed. you were depressed, you developed a thyroid issue all of a sudden because your hormones had affected your body in this way, Hashimoto's, which we can talk about sometime with another expert. And I just think it's so important to tune into what you're needing. And if what you're needing is to break free of your 9-to-5 job and you've had this idea that's just been driving you crazy and keeping you up at night and you're so inspired, totally follow that path while also staying realistic and having, a partner or parents that support you or whatever you can do to make sure that you will be able to eat food and pay your bills. And then after you try that for a while, you need to be able to feel and navigate when enough is enough and know that there are a lot of things that you are good at and a lot of things you are worthy of doing in your life. And you don't need to define yourself based on that thing. And I think we both do that. I define myself a lot. Like, no, I would never sell philosophy. And I get very defensive because philosophy is my baby. And no, like that would never came into my mind when we would talk about that. Still, I get very defensive. I'm a little more open to the idea now after 10 years of running philosophy that, okay, if the right person came in and wanted to buy it for a lot of money, I'd be open to that. But I want to control it. It's my baby. I created it. And I think you felt the same way about alternatives.
Yeah. And, having the first, I'll call it the first quote unquote failure of my attempts since all my, crazy part of my life. Having the first thing that I can say, I created it and then it ended and not the way I wanted it to end.
Right.
That was a really humbling experience. And I think for anybody who goes into entrepreneurship, there's got to be, I totally agree with what you're saying, a sense from the beginning of how do you know if it's going okay or not. And, I listened to a lot of podcasts and a lot of things about startups. And one of the things is you don't really know, right? A lot of companies go through ups and downs, near failures, pivots where they change what they do. They bring on new investors and new partners and they completely change. And 15, 20 years later, 8 years later, it becomes a completely different thing that is massively successful. And that's the catch. That's what's so hard about this. And so I think that leads really well into this next piece. And in this interview, I think a lot of what we're going to end up talking about is how do you prepare yourself? How do you prepare yourself for all the things you can't be ready for? And then how do you know if it's going well or if you want to jump out?
Yep.
Stay tuned.
This episode of the Ignited podcast is brought to you by Philosophy Superfoods. The Philosophy offers cleanses and other nutritional products that are unlike any of the other supplements and detoxification programs on the market. Why? Because they actually nourish the body with whole, live, nutrient-rich foods instead of depriving you and leaving you hungry. Have you ever tried a cleanse only to find out that you can't make it through a whole day because you're starving? Ever try a superfood shake that made you nauseous because it was so disgusting you'd rather not eat? The Philosophy fix all that with a simple set of offerings that load up your body with nutrients while actually tasting good. Makes sense, right? Each of the Philosophy superfood and protein blends is vegan, raw, gluten-free, and has absolutely no filler ingredients. With over 15,000 satisfied customers, including some of the world's biggest celebrities like George Clooney, Gerard Butler, Lea Michele, and over 10 years of experience, this is the best stuff you can get. To buy some or find out more info, go to our website, thephilosophy.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is the interview section. We've got Lisa Bilyeu with us today. I feel like I'm tongue-tied just because I'm trying to think about everything we were talking about before, which is how to say your name. And we were talking about like these things you come up with to fake people into being able to say your name. And you put it in my head that it's like you tell somebody when you want to bill them, I bill you.
Yeah.
And then you said something that I thought was really funny. You were saying you don't really like being associated with bills.
No. Yeah, that's the last thing I want to be associated with, but I'm not quite sure how else to say it. And my maiden name is like this really long Greek name. And so I thought, when I get married, I'm going to have like such an easy name to use. And now it's French and people don't know how to pronounce it. And
So the funny thing is when I met Sophie, 13 years ago, I had a couple of different approaches of how to do it. And I think this is relevant because it's the relationship, right? How do you introduce yourself to other people? And one of my tricks back then was, imagine you got a really bad grade on a test. You got a D. And that's how you say my name. And I had the exact same thing. I was like, but I don't want people to think of me and think of a crappy grade.
Right.
That's not cool.
Yeah.
So I had to come up with a new one. And that's the first half of Adidas is my new one.
Got to respect that.
So, maybe we'll come up with like a trick for you.
That's what I was going to say. If any of your fans or listeners out there have a great idea on how to pitch Bilyeu as not someone that's being billed, I'm all for it.
Cool. We'll come up. So we're gonna crowdsource a new name for you. That's what we're gonna do here.
I appreciate that.
We're gonna do that today. So I want you to introduce yourself. You mentioned your husband already a little bit, but I want you to introduce yourself to our listeners. You guys have quite the history before even this stage. So why don't you tell everybody about what you do, what you and your husband do together?
Yeah, so my husband and I, we've been together for 17 years. We've been married for 15. And we co-found a company called Quest Nutrition. From there, we then started a new company called Impact Theory. And so we work together day in, day out. We work from the home. All our crew come to the house and work here every day. We film all our content from the house. So, we are through and through business partners and life partners.
Yeah, which is amazing by itself because, again, this is all about relationships and figuring out how you guys make that work is key, I think, for a lot of people listening. And obviously, Quest by itself, that worked.
Yes, it did work. Yeah.
I think you guys made it. I think you're good.
It depends where you're judging, because for us, like both Tom and I have that same vision of where we're trying to get to. But the truth is there's no end to it. So it's like my husband, we say like he's the visionary and I'm the executor, which is why we work so well together. So he has like these grand visions, these grand ideas, these crazy notions that everyone else thinks is insane and dismissive. But the one time, like I said to him, like, babe, I bet on you. Right. And like, I'm all in, like whatever crazy idea you have, I trust you. And together we're going to make this work. So, he has like these crazy ideas and I just figure out how to actually put them into effect, really. So we work very well together and we've just developed that over time because, no one can be perfect at anything. And I think everyone has their own issues that they have to kind of work through. So.
Sure. And I remember I heard an interview with your husband. This was a while back. Maybe it was like Tony Robbins.
Yes.
And they were talking about the origin, right? The idea of I'm going to create something that includes all the relevant nutrition in a single bar, and then kind of went out and did the research and you guys did the work to actually make it happen.
Yeah, and the biggest interesting thing for me in the story of telling about Quest is how I went from being a housewife. So we'd already been married for 8 years. He'd worked in a job that he was miserable at. And eventually I just said, you've lost your entire personality. Like, where's the man that had the enthusiasm and the spirit? Because I think it's sometimes hard to see within yourself. But when you have a partner that you can really trust to know whatever they're saying or doing is purely for your best interest. And so when I said that, I think he really like recognized that it was in the best interest of him and our relationship to acknowledge that was happening to him and then figuring out ways around it. So then he started Quest with his business partners and I was a stay-at-home wife. And he literally turned around to me right at the beginning and said, babe, do you mind just helping out? Like, we just need you to weigh ingredients. Like, no big deal. Take you 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And then cut to, let's say, a year later, and I'm literally running our shipping department. Right. And so it was like I was shipping boxes from our living room floor, and then I went into figuring out how to build a warehouse, how to get a staff together. And I'd never done it before. But because I was so determined on where we were trying to get to and that we're in this together, I was like, I can't let him down. So I just didn't stop. So I didn't really think about the transition from a housewife to an entrepreneur. It just kind of happened over time. And then like a year later, I realized, wow, I really like this. Like, I'm good at it, which I think is always something that people need to consider, right? Like, you get that positive reinforcement when you're good at something.
Sure.
So it's like, I was good at it. I could tell Tom was proud that he could lean on me. And so I started discovering myself as a businesswoman. And that really changed my husband and my dynamic because, you know, I was a stay-at-home wife and he was the guy that went out to work. And all of a sudden we were working on this company together day in and day out, and I couldn't be fulfilling both roles. And so that really came to a big point where we had to say, okay, well, what roles are we looking for with each other? Do you want me to be a stay-at-home wife? Because right now, I don't know if I want to be anymore. And we had to address that because the last thing we wanted was to have that kind of silent battle that happens over time where he's like, where's my dinner? And I'm like, but I'm at work. And then it just becomes, you're fighting about something that you're not actually fighting about, right? What you're really fighting about, I think, comes down to like what roles you're going to play and come into an agreement with that versus fighting over where's my dinner. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple of things that we've talked about before on this podcast that really come in there. And I want to see how that got you guys to impact theory.
Yeah.
But you said one thing, like you're fighting about a topic that seems like that's a thing, right? Like what about dinner or what about this vacation or whatever the thing is. But then you find out that typically there's an underlayer to that. Some miscommunication, some role expectation, something that hasn't been clarified that needs to have the deep conversation. And to me, the relationships that win, the relationships that make it, the relationships that keep going are the ones that figure out how to have those really uncomfortable conversations. Right?
And to keep having them because you're going to change over time. So I think people fear that. It's like, oh, once upon a time I said I wanted to be a stay-at-home wife and have kids. But now I'm finding that that's not the case. You have to talk about it because then it's like you were saying, it's that silent battle, but you're not really arguing about that. You're arguing about, hang on a minute, we made an agreement 10 years ago that you're going to be the stay-at-home wife. It's like, but I've changed. So
and I think you don't always know. Like you need to process it with someone you trust.
Yes.
So that you can really get there. Like your life partner is going to help you see parts of yourself that you might not even recognize. Like I'm noticing that you're not actually really lighting up anymore doing this other thing, but you seem really into this other thing. Like sometimes a D has noticed things before I've even noticed them in myself. And he's allowed me to have the freedom and the space and feel safe enough that I can trust making a change or trying something new or dropping a friend or, you know, whatever it is, the thing that creates change in my life. It's because I feel support from my partner that I feel safe enough to do so.
Yeah, it's so important to give each other that for sure.
Yeah.
So you said that there was a period when those roles weren't defined and then you had to kind of sit down and have that conversation. Do you mind? I want to dig into that a little bit. Who initiated it? Who noticed it first? What was it causing in your life before it got sorted out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we, like I said, the transition happened rather slowly for me, where it was like, okay, I'm just weighing a few ingredients because we started Quest in the evening. So Tom was going to work every single day with his two business partners at a tech company. And eventually he's like, I can't do this anymore. Like it's literally sucking the soul out of me. And so they agreed, okay, let's transition out of this company. Let's try and sell it and then do this protein bar company. But we didn't want to put all our eggs in one basket. So we were basically making the bars at nighttime. And so he was going to work all day. And then from like 6 to, midnight, we were at the rental kitchen rolling protein bars with rolling pins and knives. And at the time I was kind of like, I'm going to be a supportive wife. Like, I'll help out, sure. And then it was like, oh God, well, who's going to mail the bars to the customers because we don't have employees. There's no money. So I was like, okay, I'll do it from my living room floor. And so it kind of developed like that.
Yeah.
And I just loved it. And to me, it's like anytime I find something that I really, that either inspires me or lights that fire inside of me, I just go for it. It's the same how I feel about the gym. And so with Quest, I just went for it. And it was probably about a year in. And I had built our shipping department. So I started getting employees I'd never had before. I mean, big burly guys. You're talking, 6'5". Our facility was in Compton. So we were hiring a lot of people from Compton because at the time, that's all we really could afford. We weren't looking for anyone educated. It was someone just looking for people who had grit like we did, right? Like, come on in, take the job. Let's build this together.
Sometimes that's the best people to hire.
Yeah.
Oh, their grit and like their persistence is so something to admire, because they think like, I'm just lucky to have a job and I want to work my butt off. And as an entrepreneur, you're thinking, I've got everything invested in this. If Quest went down, we lost our house. Like it was, we put every penny on the line to make it work. So they had the grit, we had the grit. But I was dealing with ex-felons, and I was literally dealing with guys that are like 6 foot, 6'5", and I would have to make sure that I was getting the job done and that they weren't trying to, you know, be lazy. And so I had to toughen up, and I didn't realize I was toughening up.
Yeah.
So here I was, the nurturer of the family. I was taking care of my husband. I was putting his clothes out for him. That's the extent of like how much I took care of him, because we had agreed he was going to be the entrepreneur. He was going to spend every waking moment building, you know, whatever business he'd set his mind to. And I had agreed I was going to set your clothes out. I'm going to make every meal for you. I'm going to pay all the bills, deal with the gardener, like everything at home I'm going to handle. Well, of course, as that changed, I went from being the nurturer to now having to deal with employees. I hardened up. And one day he literally turned to me and he said, baby, I love you, but you're really hardening up and we need to discuss that. And it was almost that then got us to talk about our roles in our relationship, because it meant like, okay, well, I'm not that soft, sweet person that's waiting for you to come home with open arms. You know, I'm leaving work with stress, with real problems, with dealing with employees, with having to just think on a different level. And so we discussed what that meant. We discussed what that meant for our relationship, what that meant for me as an individual, and the sacrifices he would have to make if he really wanted a wife that was a stay-at-home, and if I was willing to go back home or not. And I just said, I'm finding my passion. I'm really like feeling that fire. And he immediately said, look, babe, your happiness is the biggest thing that I care about. So if this is what you love and if this is what's making you happy, then amazing. Like I will support you, but we need to figure out how you don't bring that, let's say, aggression or that alpha male spirit back to the house. Because he's like, I want to be the alpha male. And the truth is I want to be the beta male. So if my husband wants to be the alpha and I want to be the beta, like I want him to lead the family. I want him to be the protector of the family, but I don't want to be a stay-at-home wife that is looking to just start a family. Like that wasn't interesting in me anymore. So we laid all of that true transparency out on the table. Like, this is what I want selfishly. If I never even have to think about my husband, this is what I want selfishly. And he did the same. And so then we just figured out, okay, well, what works for you? What works for me? What is the selfish things for you? The selfish things for me? And then how do we find this beautiful, happy medium that we are both happy to accept and go down? And it wasn't until we had that massive true transparency that we were actually able to come to this kind of development of going from a housewife to his business partner.
What allowed you in your past to even know to have that conversation?
I think for me, my parents, I come from a divorced parents, and I was around 8 or 9 years old, and they were always very amicable with each other. But I remember people saying like, oh, my friends, like, oh, my parents are still together. And then you'd see them and they were profoundly unhappy. And so here I was wishing that my parents were still married, but all of my friends' parents were completely unhappy. Like one of my friends, her dad slept downstairs while her mom slept upstairs. And so I just saw all these really bad relationships. And I thought, you know what? I'd rather be single than be in an unhappy marriage. I'd rather have to tell my husband I'm no longer, like, this isn't working, we need to separate, so that we can both be profoundly happy. I don't think staying together, if you're not trying to find a solution, makes sense. So with me and my husband, it was like, okay, well, what are our options? We have to either figure this out so that we can both be happy in this relationship, or we need to come to a conclusion that neither of us are willing to give, neither of us are willing to necessarily sacrifice. And so then we have to part. Now, we didn't actually talk about parting, but we know that we have kind of almost like when we first got together had that agreement where it's like, if you're not happy, if I'm not happy, we have to talk about it. Otherwise we're going to, just have a relationship of misery, and neither of us want that.
Yeah. But a lot of people say that.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to the really tough conversations, they don't end up having it. So some of the things that you brought up, like, I'm okay with you, or I'm happy for you to play this role outside the house, but I'm looking for a different role inside the house. And all those sorts of conversations they're pretty deep conversations. Do you mind? Like, did you guys seek professional help? Did you talk to any professionals about any of these sorts of issues?
I love that you called me on that, by the way. That was a really good point, because you're right. Some people have the great intentions, but they don't necessarily go into execution.
It's hard.
It is. And I think that our lives have been built around execution. So whether it was the company, so even getting married, or, figuring out how I come from London, he's from America, like, how do we make that work? Okay, we have an end goal. We set our end goal, and then everything then depends on that end goal. So, okay, well, I need to get to America because the end goal is for us to be married and live together. All right, so what are those steps we have to take? Like can I swear on this show?
Yeah.
Okay, so the no bullshit, what will it take? And that, to me, like, if you just always want to break out of your, like, how do I be honest? Ask yourself that. No bullshit, what will it take? And so we have those discussions all the time. And so when it comes to the company, no bullshit, what will it take? Okay, we'll take putting our house on the line. Okay, well, what does that mean? Potentially losing it. Okay, are we cool with that? Like, all of these things are to get to the end goal. So if our end goal is to have sincerely the best possible relationship we can, true happiness by living with each other, no bullshit, what is that going to take? And the truth is, it takes such brutal honesty where you can't worry about the other person's feelings. There has to be respect there, right? But at least if you go, okay, he's being brutally honest and I'm being brutally honest, there's no malice there. And I think that that's one thing people are worried about. I don't want to hurt his feelings if I say that I don't want to be a stay-at-home wife. But there's no malice. So why am I going to be judged on the truth if all I'm looking for is that end goal that we decided on, which is a great relationship?
So isn't it funny how we have to use terms like brutally honest, though, to describe it? Like, because we talked about in the emails when we were setting up for this, we talk about radical transparency.
Yeah.
Sophie and I talk about things that we've found out most couples never talk about, all the way from what do you like sexually to what kind of things are you looking for in life. When we started working with other couples, we found out there are couples that have been married for 20, 30, 40 years who have never had these discussions. And then they wonder why the relationship struggles. They don't even really know each other very well.
Yeah.
I think it's really beautiful, though. I mean, that you said, like, you come to it as two brutally honest people, and that there's nothing else attached to it. Like, you're just coming as a vulnerable person and saying, here's what I'm feeling. And it's amazing, especially as women, how many of us hold on to that at different variants in terms of just holding back, and not even knowingly. I don't think we do it even knowingly. I think I was just talking about this actually with my assistant. She said ever since she started working with me, she's way more, quote, honest, open, outspoken. And her boyfriend notices, and he'll say little things. Like, just the other day, he's like, wow, I don't remember the word that he said, but just responding, this truth that she's changed and that she's more comfortable being more outspoken. And to her, she was like, wasn't I always? And I think that it's different layers of honesty. Like I feel like I've always been a very outspoken person, X, Y, and Z. But now when I look at the way that I treat my relationships, my friendships, my love life, all of it, I'm like, how did I even live before?
Right. I think it's because we all so desperately want to be loved, right? By your friends, by your family, by your other half.
Anyone's feelings.
Right. So you play this like weird fine line where you're like, okay, I don't want to hurt their feelings. I want them to love me. So you kind of couch things, you put a filter on what you say. And I think that the one thing that Tom and I figured out is there's ways to say things with compassion, with empathy, with respect, right? You may be saying something actually very horrible for someone to hear. Like, look, babe, you're terrible at this. I need us to work on it, because if you don't, I fear that X, Y, and Z is going to happen. But if you say it and you approach it like we're in this as a team versus pointing the finger, like you did this and you said this, and like that doesn't work. No one wants to be victimized.
Yeah.
So if you can do it with respect and be honest as well, I think people end up, as long as you're on that same page, because look, some people I don't think can hear that.
Yeah,
right?
and if you're not honest, you end up not having the real relationship you want with that person anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Right.
you end up harboring resentments. And it's actually a big part of it is your fault, because you never spoke out loud. You never expressed these things. Some people hold on to them for 20 years and then they wonder why the other person doesn't get them or hasn't read their mind.
Yeah, our needs, our wants, our desires, all of that is like nothing to be afraid of. It's just the way you are, and coming to the relationship with, these are my needs, these are my wants, these are my fears, this is what I'm, this is where I am, and just owning that. And there's something really freeing about sharing that with your partner, and also then helps with your intimacy.
Yeah, it really does. I think when you can feel that connected, right, when there's no filters, there's no barriers between you, like that does translate into every aspect of your life. Like you hit the nail on the head, like the intimacy thing, like forget it. Like you feel so comfortable with your other half because they see the real you and they still want to be with you. Like that is the most beautiful thing I think you can hope from anybody.
Totally. So here we are. You guys have built this. You built this company, nutrition company. It's doing really, really well. And then I'm assuming you're still involved in that to some extent, but now you started this new thing. You want to tell us about impact theory and what the...
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to goal setting, and then also like, what are you living for? Like, what is your driver? And initially, the driver for Quest Nutrition was to help all the people that are desperately trying to lose weight, but that can't handle giving up certain foods. So it's like, look, we're here to help. And then over time, we realized that my mother and Tom's mom, it was still seriously overweight, like obese, clinically obese. So here we are now, we've just built arguably the largest nutrition company in the world, and my mom and his mom are still severely overweight. There's something missing here. So what we did is I actually ended up building our studio within Quest Nutrition. So my background is filmmaking. So at Quest, we built a studio. We had producers. We were doing content for the product. And we started one show called Inside Quest. And it was to really dive deep into the mindset of the great achievers. And then over time, just realized like, this is my passion. Like that is my end goal, to really create impact on a global scale, not just for people that have already decided, hey, I want to lose weight, or hey, I want to make my life better, but for actually people who can't get there yet, who can't do that mind shift. Because I think that's step one. Step one is the mind. Step two is the body.
Oh, totally.
So, we had the discussion and the vision of Quest Nutrition with Tom's business partners. They wanted to focus on the food and the body, and Tom and myself were looking to focus more on the mind. So we're like, okay, well, look, why create a big company, obviously wealth creation, and then not be able to dictate your own life? So we said we just bought a house. We were about to knock the whole thing down and rebuild. We spent like a year and a half making plans for the house, and we just looked at each other and we said, like, what really is happiness? It's bringing value. So we're like, screw it. We don't need a new house. So we took the money that we were about to put into building a massive, beautiful house, and we said, let's just start a new company called Impact Theory, where we can affect the mind. And so we built a studio in our house. In fact, we have 4 sets at our house that we built, and we have 12 employees that come here every day. And so now we really feel like we're on that next step, right? That next goal, moving that goalpost, saying, okay, what do we want to achieve now? And yeah, that's kind of how we end up where we are.
That's awesome. So what's like, clue us in. What are some of the things that you guys are already doing? What can people do?
So, the great thing with Tom and I is, I'd kind of said it at the beginning, but we have different roles in our relationship. And to be honest, I think that's very important. It's at least been important for us, because I don't think you can have 2 visionaries. You can't have 2 leaders. I think that there needs to be an establishment, whether it's at home or in business, of what those roles are. So we understand that Tom is very good at talking. Like, he's very good at motivating people, but just not just motivation, given real world examples of how to actually execute. And my background is film, and I'm really good at logistics. So he's basically, when we're working and we're filming, we film. So today, just to let you know, we've got 4 shoots in one day. So we do Facebook Live videos. Our main show is called Impact Theory, where we have athletes on, we have brain surgeons on, we have neuroscientists on, we have singers on. We just had Mike Posner on. We had Layla Ali on. People who have achieved greatness, but talking about how they got there, because no one was born great. So what is the difference between these great people and your average person? It's the fact that they didn't let failure stop them. It's the fact that they were willing to admit their weaknesses. Like, you see these patterns in successful people. And so it's really helping people do that mind shift between I can't to damn well I can, you know? So that's the show, but our dynamic is quite funny because I'm the executor. I call him my talent when we're actually filming. So, so that dynamic changes because as the company, he's the CEO. But when we're filming, I'm the executive producer and he's my talent. And then when we're at home, he's my alpha male and I'm the beta. So like, we've developed this over time though, and we've really figured out, okay, what are your strengths? What are my strengths? Let's play to those strengths. And then let's make sure that if we ever come to a head on something, that we know how to handle it. So for instance, if we come to a head on things with the household, I get final say, even if he disagrees. I'll be very respectful. I'll listen to what he wants. We'll go through the discussion. And if I don't feel strongly, I'll just go with what he says. But if we come to a head and we both feel very strongly, we've agreed I get final say. When it comes to the business, he'll be very respectful. We'll have discussions. We treat each other like partners. But if we come to a point where neither of us can be persuaded, he gets final say. And that just has alleviated any, I think, animosity between us, because there's no resentfulness, because we've made those decisions. We call them like our sober moments. So when you guys are getting along great and it's perfect in your relationship, but perfect in the business, that's when you decide your ground rules, because there's no emotion. You're sober about it. And so we had those, literally, we set those ground rules with home, business, work when we shoot. And it's worked amazingly for us.
That's so beautiful. I love that.
That's really great.
Okay, so now we have a couple questions we want to ask you that we ask all our guests.
All right, let's do it.
The first one is, what is the best advice you have ever received?
Oh, the best from my husband or just in general?
On life.
I probably would say the one thing that comes to mind right now actually was from Tom, and it was, everything is in my control. It immediately stopped me from playing the victim, and in every aspect of my life. So being a woman, understanding my emotions, okay, well, it's in my control. My emotions may not be, but how I control acting on my emotions is. So that was so powerful in my personal life, in business. It stopped me from playing the victim, blaming everybody else. It allowed me to take control of my life. And so now when we have any discussions, even between us, we recognize not to just blame each other. But you did this. Well, hang on a minute. How did I participate in that argument? How did I participate in that problem? And so it just shifts that focus point of pointing the finger and going, how do we solve this? How is this in my control? How do I fix it? So that's the best piece of advice that changed everything in every aspect of my being.
That's great. I love that one. What has been your proudest moment?
Ooh, my proudest moment. I think when we sold a portion of Quest. So Quest was announced $1 billion company. It was the second fastest growing company in 2010. God, I can't remember the date, but yes, maybe. And so everyone's like, it was doing so well, but there was nothing really to show for it. Like we were still in because every penny we had, we put back into the company. And so when we first sold that first piece of the company, God, I don't like to say that it was validation because I don't like to like link money with that. But there was something to like, we had so many doubters. We had so many people, that were doubting me for moving to America and marrying someone that wasn't Greek. The major doubts in my family.
Sure.
Then I was marrying someone who was an artist who, you know, he was in film as well. So everyone doubted that. Then we started Quest and people were like, what the hell do you guys know about protein bars? So we had doubters there. And then it was like, well, if you don't have anything to show for it, who cares how big the company says on paper? So like all these doubters that me and him never doubted ourselves, but it was kind of just a nice way of showing like, okay, we stuck it out. We believed in each other. We pushed hard. And now there's like validation to all the times that we'd fought.
Absolutely. I think that's so important though. It's important to just hit certain milestones and just feel like get positive feedback. I think it's natural, because if not, then you're just always in the hamster wheel.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going and going and going and going. If you don't get any feedback from anyone, I mean, especially in a big way, then you don't know how big of a splash you're really making.
Right. Yeah. And to be honest, like I have no problem with wealth creation. I think that it should be something that should be celebrated. And like for us, it's, in order to do that, like to do impact theory, we had to do Quest Nutrition to give us the finances because we're completely self-funded. So things like that is like, okay, taking your achievements, but then putting them to something better, something bigger, your next goal. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I would say that's the one big thing that comes to mind. There's other like minute moments, like I still, whenever I see Tom speak, whether it's in front of 10 people or whether it's in front of 3,000 people, I get that giddiness. Like I'm his little like cheerleader, or like, you know, like the rock bands where you've got like the fans in the crowd. That's me. So every time I see him speak, I get that flutter in my the butterflies.
That's awesome.
So proud.
Yeah,
I get that. And then what about on the flip side? What has been your hardest moment?
Oh, so I've had major health issues, which is very ironic considering we have one of the largest nutrition companies. But about 2.5 years ago, going on 3 years now, I had a major issue with my digestion, and it kind of all came to a head when I got the stomach flu. And once I got the stomach flu, I couldn't go backwards, which meant that I couldn't really eat. So, and I actually legitimately mean that. Every time I took a bite of food, my stomach would cramp. I would be rolled over in pain. And so I withered away. I couldn't eat. I wasn't getting any of my nutrients. My hair was falling out. My nails were breaking. And so that was the hardest point from a lot of aspects. Just from a personal, like dealing with health like that is very difficult.
Yeah.
Seeing my husband deal with it, because for him being proud of being the alpha and his position to be like he's responsible for my health, like responsible for me, he took it very personally. And seeing the struggle for him where he's like, I need to fix this, right? Like I have all these resources, we're doing like it's the best the company has ever done, and here we are on a personal level having major health issues. And of course that leads into, you know, my hormones were changing. So I was more emotional. So now I'm getting annoyed and upset over no reason. So our relationship had to like really change, and we had to understand what I was going through so that we didn't just argue all the time. Obviously our sex life definitely adapted and changed because I couldn't stand up for more than 5 minutes at a time.
Oh.
And this went on for over a year. So it was like, I would say one of the worst experiences we've had to, and I'm still going through it. I'm still dealing with my microbiome. I am able to eat somewhat now. I'm on a very restricted plan diet, and I have a whole plan that I'm doing over the next 6 months. So I've done really well, but we're still fighting it. And but that 6 months where I couldn't eat anything to a year was very difficult. But at the same time, I always like to say, and this is actually stolen from Tony Robbins, where it's like, how do you take the worst thing that's ever happened, the worst day of your life, and make it your best? And so I asked myself that question every single day. And the answer was always, this is going to make me stronger. This is going to make me and Tom stronger. Because where other people would crack, right? Where other guys are like, well, I'm not getting much sex anymore. Like, do I go elsewhere? Right? That's a very real conversation I think you need to have. And then also understanding my emotions. I'm not a very overly emotional person. I don't get swings, but all of a sudden I did. So here I am now crying, which I hardly ever cry. I cry like maybe twice a year. But here I am like falling apart in his office at Quest in tears. And he didn't give up on me. He didn't say, well, I'm not dealing with this. He's like, all right, we're in it together. How do we do this? So the things we learned and the way it built up our strength as a couple was so tremendous that even though it was the worst time of my life, I would say it has also, in trying to see the positive in everything, has now become, I think, a blessing. I don't like to say that, but if you know what I mean, like it's taught us things I don't think we would have learned if we hadn't gone through it together.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. And I mean, we've had a lot of the same sort of experiences where the worst moments led to the biggest discoveries. And I think this leads really well to the next question, because you must have really paid attention to and started looking at how you take care of yourself in light of this. So what is your self-care ritual now? How do you make sure that you are at your best?
Yeah, I think diet is a major thing. I think what we put in our bodies really does affect how I personally function, my emotions, my mood swings, my cognitive behavior. So I think diet and making sure that you're getting the right nutrients is like the most important thing, which you can understand why it was so hard for me when like I couldn't physically digest it. So it's like, I know this is what I should be doing. I just can't. So I think diet is, or just what you eat is a big deal. I think having selfish time is so important. And what I mean by that is there are times where I want to do something that I don't care if my husband wants to do it or not. I just want to do it for my sake. And we call that selfish time. And so for me, I make sure that at least an hour a day, I have selfish time. Which if that's cuddling my husband, then great. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes I don't want to be around him. I want to be by myself. I want to work out. Usually working out is my selfish time because I get to play my super cheesy music and sing my heart out and lift heavy weights. But I think that is so important. And Tom and I established that right from the beginning. So there's never like, oh, you don't want selfish time with me? And it's like, no, sorry, I love you to bits, but no, I don't. And the fact that you don't take that personally, no, neither of us do, is amazing. And I think that that's so important, especially when you work together. And I'm sure you guys can attest to it, right? You do the podcast together, you live together, you've got kids together. If you can't be honest with each other and say, look, I'm going to go down the street and hang out with my friends, or I want to watch The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, right? Like whatever it is, if you can own it and not be judged for it and not worry about hurting the other person's opinion, then yeah, I think that is like the biggest medicine on a daily basis that somebody could have, at least, yeah, for me.
Totally.
For us too, for sure. Final question.
Yeah.
The name of our podcast is Ignited. You've talked about this a little bit throughout, but what ignites you?
Striving for something, growth. And I think that that's why, like, if Tom and I have a problem in our relationship, I don't think of it as like, oh my God, this is like a massive wall that we have to knock down. Like, it's like, oh, I can't, like, it's going to be so time consuming and emotionally consuming. Like, I just see it as like, this is amazing. How do we grow from this, babe? How did we come 17 years and never have to deal with this issue? All right. Like, what techniques, what are we going to learn? And look, it doesn't mean that we don't get upset. It doesn't mean that we don't like slip and go, well, you hurt my feelings. Like, of course, but all of that is an exploration. And so if you can be ignited by the exploration of getting better, whether it's your relationship as an individual, as a business partner, whatever that is in your life, like to me, that is the biggest fire I could possibly have inside me. And I think you need to keep igniting it, right? Like you have to repeat it and you have to address it time and time again, because it really is like a fire. If you don't keep putting wood on it, it will burn out. It will. So you have to address every day, every week, every month, what ignites you? What are we doing? And so, yeah, so for me, it's the exploration of that just keeps me on fire.
I love that. I love it because so many people look at problems as signs that things are not going well.
Right.
And they're not, they're just a reality. So having this notion that, oh, here's another opportunity to improve our relationship. Here's another opportunity to work on what we never had to work on for whatever reason for 12, 13, 17 years, whatever it is. Just that little switch in mindset. You talked already about some of the guests that you guys have on your podcast. That is the difference between the people who make it and the people who stop early. Is just that mindset of, oh, here's a new thing I have to learn how to overcome.
Yeah. Exactly. And you have to actually overcome it. That's the other part of it, right? Is that you can't give up. You can't say, well, it doesn't matter, because it will catch up with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I can guarantee that our listeners are going to get so many really helpful things to just really ignite them and change their lives just from listening to this. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me on. And if any of your listeners want to hear any more about my husband and my relationship, we actually do a show called Relationship Theory, which is on Facebook on my husband's channel. So it's Tom Bilyeu on Facebook. We do that live. We do that once a week. We take live questions from our fans. And we basically, exactly how we spoke today, we dive deep, like no holds barred, no bullshit, that type of attitude where it's like, this is us and this is how we've made it work. So.
Awesome. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can tune in.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Ignited podcast. We were so happy to have you along for this ride. Please go and subscribe to this. Leave us a review. We love hearing from you. And if you want more, don't forget to go to ignited.com, where all the podcast episodes are available with show notes and so many of the little details and links from each one of these interviews. And you can look at all the future events that we have going on, all the things that make Ignited so special, even beyond this recording. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next week.